So, good evening, all. Welcome to the new episode of Let's Talk Film. CS, as I've told you, Vallath education is about opening up new avenues of expression for English language students, and most of our audience are literature students, language students from different parts of India. So, true to this context, we are exploring different art forms that can be connected to language and literature studies. And as you know, film is one of the major art form that can manifest the use of language in it. Dear participants, have here as our guest for today Sri S. Venkiteswaran. He is an acclaimed film critic, author, and a teacher. And this is a very special episode for us, as majority of us are literature students, and we are going to have an interesting conversation with Sri S. Venkiteswaran about writing about films. Let's start. CS, welcome to the show. So, to give a proper introduction, CS, how do you approach a film?
Yeah, it's a very difficult question. But, if you look back because for someone like me who has been watching films, has been a passion for the last 40, 50 years, I would say it has changed over the years. It's changed over the years. Because it is not, now today you're not watching a film as you watched it earlier. For instance, there's this huge shift from analog to digital, which has actually radically transformed the way in which we watch films. The platforms have changed, the modes of viewing have changed. So all these have actually changed the whole, the experience of watching films, and also viewing and reviewing films have become totally different. So basically, what you're doing today is, in a sense, if you compare between the way in which films are viewed some 20 years back and today, the basic difference would be this: with the coming of the digital, we are living in an age of access. Because you have a lot of information, you have every film on the net, you have torrents, you have YouTube, you have all kinds of OTT channels and all that. So there is a huge access in which you are living today, unlike earlier, where you're actually living in an age of lack. So what happens is, like, along with access, what I have felt especially when I interact with students and all that, is that the quality of viewing has changed, has actually deteriorated, because you think you can watch it anytime. You're not actually watching it in theater, you're watching in small screens, which itself is a totally different kind of experience. So there is a kind of dilution of the quality of attention that you give to the image. So the whole confrontation, the interface between the image and the viewer has radically transformed. So you're living in a kind of, in an age of distraction, in an age of excess. So film viewing as such is transformed, in a huge way. So approaching a film today, in the sense, it's not like what we did in the 70s or 80s before pre-digital era, where film itself was a film industry, or the product called film itself was a huge presence in one's, visual consumption. It is a huge presence. Now I think everything is like everybody is producing visuals. So everyone who has a mobile phone, smartphone, is a filmmaker today. So he creates images. So you're actually confronting a situation where everyone is an image maker. So people know about the image making processes. So the way in which you experience images, the way in which you are talking about images, everything has totally transformed. I think you are living in an age of excess and distraction, which is a huge challenge especially for film critic or reviewer, to connect with the viewer, to bring his or her attention to a particular film, because he is also living amidst a huge array of visual opportunities for consumption. So that is basic thing that I would start with.
Yeah. So you started when in the 80s or the 70s, when you started writing, being a critic. The primary role of the critic was to introduce that film and explain, or lead the audience to the nuances of that particular film that you are speaking about. Whereas, as you have rightly said, in 2024, the sensibilities have changed. People are more aware about the genres and the different technical details of the filming. So, what is the role of the critic in the present times?
I think the role one in the present context, I think the critique has to reinvent himself in a totally different way. Earlier, as I said, if you're living in an age of lack, where the reader of a review was yet to see the film, or the reader of a film he or she has not watched as many films as you have watched. It's not the case anymore. Like, people are watching all kinds of things, and you really don't know whom you're addressing in that sense. So actually, what is happening today is like, one has to approach films with an open mind. So, for instance, you just have to, you may have your own preoccupations, you may have your own political biases, aesthetic choices, and all that. But what you have to do is actually, how do a reviewer or film critic will address the excess? So, what we need to do is to contextualize a film to the viewer. So put a film in context. So can we connect it with both? If I'm writing about a Malayalam film, Malayalam movie, what I should be doing is to be sensitive to the history of Malayalam cinema. Where does it stand in terms of the whole history of Malayalam cinema? And also in terms of where does it stand in the global field, Because a lot of films are happening all around. People are today, if you look at the kind of visual consumption patterns of, an average Malayali or an average Indian, it has shifted towards global consumption. People are watching, Netflix, Amazon, a lot of global content is being watched. And the proportion of global content is more than the local content. So there's a huge challenge that the critic has, and also the filmmaker has, because you're addressing a global consumer, unlike earlier, where you had a kind of niche market where people, the Malayali films and a Malayalam audience. Now it's no longer so. You have a global audience, and these audience are also globalized. So what the critic has to do today would be to put things in context, connect it with your own. For instance, a film coming out today should, inevitably be viewed in the context of the Indian social political situation, as well as, what is happening elsewhere in world cinema today. You connect it with what happening elsewhere, like different kinds of movement, different ways in which people are using technologies, and different aesthetic kinds of adventures and experimentations that are happening elsewhere. So can we connect it with the global, context, and also with your own, social political circumstances and history? That is, I think, what critics should be doing, so as to help the viewer, the reader of the reviewer or film critic, to contextualize his own experience or her own experience of watching the film.
That's a very interesting point that you have raised. But then going back to the basics of reviewing a film, as you have rightly said, connects to different people in different ways. So as varied the audience is, that must be the variations of connections, or the way film is appealing to the audience. Even when we say the film is the creator, the art of a director who finally decides on how and what the film should carry, talents of a whole lot of artists, from actors to technical team, they all come together into play in creating that visual experience. So as a critic, when you are speaking about a film, when you are trying to contextualize the film, where do you stand, or which perspective should you stick to? Do you go by the director's vision, or the individual excellences that are featured in the film? So how does a film critic ideally approaches a film?
It also evolves through time. For instance, when your exposure to world cinema is limited, you watch films in a particular way, you're fascinated by the whole thing. Then you gradually get exposed to different genres of films, different filmmakers, classics, different film traditions all over the world. Your approach to cinema and film writing itself gradually evolves. So I think the different ways in which one approaches cinema, for instance, I would say that some people, if you look at the whole film writing, the discipline of film writing, you can see that there are many film writers who look at film as a text. You can look at the narrative structure, the aesthetic strategies adopted. You can take it as a kind of autonomous text and look at the ways in which the film is trying to carry a message or trying to express whatever it wants to express, which you're actually, imputing to the director, because the director is no longer the author or the owner of whatever is produced. Because once it is made, it is everyone's property. As you said, like everyone watches films in a different way. Like Bertolt Brecht said once, like whoever is sitting in my theater is not only sitting in my theater, he's also sitting in the world. So he also brings in his own biases, his own life experiences. Everything is brought to the act of viewing. It's a very, very visceral, he's entering a sensorium of sorts in cinema. So you don't really know what a person next to me is actually seeing and experiencing. It would be a totally different kind of thing. But as far as criticism is concerned, you have to connect with the viewer. You have to be true to the text of the film, because whatever you say, whatever critique you are making, whatever appreciation that you are trying to draw out, should have some visual evidence. You have to actually go back to the text and draw things from that to build your point and make your arguments. So that is one thing. So if you want to connect, so I think one could, maybe if you watch a film, there are certain things which attracts you. Maybe there is some brilliant acting performance that could, really, capture your attention. Sometimes it could be the narrative structure, which is very fresh and different. So it could be very different kinds of things for different kinds of films. So what a reviewer, if I tell you personally, what I do is like being open to film, not bring your own judgments into it prior to watching the film. Just keep an open mind, experience it fully. You just open yourself out and you surrender to the film first. Don't hold yourself back. You surrender to that experience and then try to understand what it was about. Like, did it touch me? Why did it actually affect me, or why it didn't affect me? So then you can go into the elements. So is it something to do with the kind of narrative structure of the film, the way it is, the act 5-act structure or whatever is not properly done, or is it due to acting problem, or is something to do with the story itself? So all those things are then comes secondly for me. I think I look at how it affects me. And the second thing is, one is not writing about all the films one sees, because there are certain elements which you think it triggers something in me. It could also be of not understanding. We should understand this. Not that we fully understand it. There is something that intrigues me, within the film. There is something that intrigues me, which I want to explore. I want to know what is that? What is it that is left remaining even after you have watched and appreciated it? So there are different kinds of ways in which you can understand films, experience films, and also talk about films. So it could be from different points of view. All those theories, whether you're looking at it from a subaltern perspective or feminist perspective or whatever, that comes later, I think. First should come the experience of watching film and your ability or your willingness to surrender to the experience of cinema. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that phrase, the surrendering to the film first, and then you try to understand, find a meaning for that. You're right about contextualizing the film, and the example is perfect where your brush said about the people sitting in the audience are in the theater are there as physical persons, at the same time they are residents of the world also. They are bringing in their own sensibilities into it. What my doubt that I have in mind when you are speaking about the contextualizing a film through review is the way there is a specific characteristic in your narrative, in your reviewing. Because I remember how you have plotted the filmography of Satyajit Ray, right from the beginning, from his first film, how it can be contextualized in the political climate at that time, right up to 1992, the year he died. In their filmography, you try to analyze against the socio-political context. The doubt that I have in mind is when you just spoke about surrendering yourself to an individual film and then starting to experience it. For a master like Satyajit Ray, when you try to contextualize it his entire filmography against a socio-political climate, will the meaning for individual films remain the same or will it change?
It changes actually. Like the way in which you watch films, somebody watches films. For instance, if you're talking personally, for instance, maybe I have watched Pathar Panjali, so is Pathar Panjali, some, maybe 60, 70 times, But it's not the same Pathar Panjali that I watched when I watched it first, when I was studying in college. It grows with me. Okay. It gathers complexity as I gather experience from life. So that is what I call art cinema. There is a film, a certain set of films that grows with you, that becomes more and more complex as you also grow. Like you look at that film totally differently today, and as it was something else when I was young and college student and all that. So that is one thing. Second thing is like cinema is like any art form, and in the case of cinema, much more strongly and deeply. It is a kind of mass art in that sense. It's a kind of, it appeals to the masses. And from the beginning, cinema was a mass art. It was never a kind of elite kind of art because anybody can understand cinema. Anybody can sit in front of it. A Chaplin, his Chaplin film could be enjoyed by anyone in Antarctica or Asia or Africa or Latin America. Doesn't matter. So film has always been a global art. And also film has, because it touches people, it is a mass art. It is also about the masses. It touches people because it is actually expressing some deep desires and complex fears, imaginations. It is also about that. So if you look at if over of a filmmaker over, for instance, Satyajit Ray, you're looking at him from the 50s to the 90s. So you can see that he is also responding to his times. Every art form also has the markings of the time. It also tells time. It also narrates a nation or the region or the culture or history in that sense. So it carries within itself, directly or indirectly, time and space, your location and your history. It is marked in it. So if you look at it deeply, if you look at, many, for instance, Ashish Nandi would say, actually, it was Indian cinema, Indian commercial cinema, that actually foresaw the degeneration of Indian politics, the way in which the politics are getting corrupted. He said slum dwellers view of life. That is what cinema is all about. Like it foretold many of the the degradations that were happening in society. So cinema is, if you look at, so by following cinema, you can actually understand a society in a much more deeper way, because it carries traces of the unconscious of society. The collective unconscious is there in terms of, it could be, very secret desires. It could be, unexpressed fears, angst, all kinds of things. So it's a kind of imaginary world where a lot of things, a lot of unconscious, subconscious things get expressed. So if you look back, the patterns become much more clear, because with the kind of, when you look back, it becomes much more clear, because you can see the patterns in which it has changed. But looking at contemporary cinema is also important because it says a lot about your society, the underbelly of your society, the unconscious of your society, which get expressed in some way or other. So it's very, very important to watch cinema. Cinema becomes a kind of way in which you can actually look at yourself and the world, because if you look at the history of cinema, the way in which it has triggered or fired popular imagination, you can say cinema is determined in a large way the way in which we look at ourselves, the way in which we segregate what is right from what is wrong, what is beautiful and what is ugly, who are us and the other. Everything is actually resonates in cinema. It is cinema that actually propagates or circulates these kinds of notions about oneself and the world. So cinema is very, very important in that sense.
Yeah, that's one that's one argument that I keep on having with the new generation film viewers, because the one trend that I have found in the new younger generation of very ardent film lovers, film buffs, is that there is an element of detachment from the contemporary social realities. They refuse to connect the film and its inherent signals to the political layering. Instead, they prefer to watch films as standalone units, standalone units of artistic expression, just that, and there is no connect with the social reality. Do you subscribe to that view?
I don't subscribe to that view, but I can't, I would rather like to look at why people are thinking like that. Why do you take such positions? It could also be due to the fact that, the way, as I said earlier, like the way in which you're seeing films, the modes of viewing has changed. In the sense, because earlier film was a communal experience, it's a public art where people get together and watch the big image on the screen. That is what connects people. There's it's a kind of social experience. It's a kind of public experience. That is why, for instance, if you look at this Da Vinci Code, when the book came out, nobody asked for a ban. When the film came, they wanted a ban. Because film is something else. Film is a church where people gather, watch these holy images, and you are, enraptured by it. So the church or whichever establishment fears that. But sitting alone and reading a book, they don't care. Actually, it's a kind of private kind of thing. But this is a public thing. So it is very, very important because our film viewing today has largely become a personalized, domesticated, small screen viewing, which is just a kind of very detached kind of thing. It's just become personal. So the kind of social aspect of cinema, so the public art that cinema is, has lost its in a sense, cinema has it is no longer seen as a public art. It is viewed privately, enjoyed privately, shared privately, and stored privately. So there is a disconnect. So it's no wonder that they think like that, because they are not actually exposed to, or they are not experiencing cinema in a public space, which would change the perception of cinema. Because when we are watching together, then it is a wholly different kind of experience, unlike this private viewing. So that could be one reason why people think it's a kind of very personalized kind of thing, which can be detached from larger questions of life or society, politics, and all that, which could also be about the general kind of disconnect between politics as such and your life. Earlier, if you look at the history of Kerala for the last 40, 50 years, there are a lot of active movements, library movement, science movement, literacy movement, union workers struggle, peasant struggle. So all these were collective action happening. So people were part of that in one way or other. There was film society movement, there was library movement, So people were part of the larger social fabric, and their experience, experiencing of the world itself was linked to their social existence. Now it is totally disconnected. Your work at home, digital, virtual kind of world that you are living in, there's a total disconnect. So it's no wonder that people don't connect your visual consumption or visual, preferences with whatever is happening around them. What makes those images, and where does it come from? Where does it go? What is happening to that is no longer being thought about.
Yeah, you're right in saying that there is a massive shift in the way films are appreciated, especially in the post-COVID time, uh, because that's the time when the digital world opened up before the audience, and now people are not only preferring to watch the movies from their personal comfort of their personal space, uh, in home or in their mobile devices. The interesting fallout or interesting spin-off from this situation is that now films are being created for such audience who are uh, secluded in. You are not part of the community that you have described just now, and they are in their own personal space. So films are being designed for such an audience. So how do you view this phase of filmmaking? This is a entirely new way of filmmaking.
But I think uh, just like when television came, people said cinema is dead, because television is going to replace cinema. It didn't actually, because cinema still continued to exist. Then OTT is the thing today. Like OTT platforms have come up, which is providing a lot of different kinds of content from all over the world. But what I think is like OTT, every new visual media technology or entertainment mode is actually creating its own forms and also its own audience. It creates a separate market. So actually, when television came, it was no longer actually a movie in a television, because you can't, because even the aspect ratio itself has to change. And then what happened was cinema film itself got tuned to that, because they already know that it has to be shown in television. So you have to compose your images in a particular way so that it is amenable to, it's compatible with television screens. So it affects both ways. Like television becomes a kind of market for film viewing, which provides a kind of revenue generation point. And cinema itself also calibrates itself to the new modes of viewing. But watching cinema in a theater is totally different from watching any cinema in the television. Likewise, OTT also is actually creating another mode of viewing, another form of art, because OTT, if you look at OTT, most of it is about series. You're watching, binge viewing is its mode of viewing actually, and it is all about series. You're watching a lot of series, you can't get away from, you get hooked onto it, and you're watching it at your own pace, unlike cinema where you go at an appointed time, you watch in continuity, 1.5 hours, 2 hours, in public, together with others, in the dark. All these totally different. So I think it is any new format of visual consumption is not actually substituting cinema, but creating another avenue for cinema. And then when OTT itself becomes very popular, especially after COVID, because COVID created a situation where, if you actually prevented your young children at home from using smartphones, now you're encouraging it, because you have to study, you have to learn through that. So what happened was, once you open up the households to smartphones and internet, what happens, you're also opening up a new market for these OTT platforms. So there is a huge influx of OTT content into that. But OTT viewing, I wouldn't say is then the films are made for OTT, not for theater. It's actually for OTT release. So what is happening is, you have to, if you look at the kind of stardom, OTT can't create stars. Only cinema can create stars, because you need a public kind of. There are no stars in OTT. In OTT you binge but there are no stars. Faces may be familiar, but they are not stars. But only film can create stars, because you need this kind of public gathering of people in a theater and all those buzz around it to create stars, to kind of, it's a different kind of experience. So OTT is not going to go to supplant or being a threat to cinema, but it provides a channel for film to be viewed, and it also provides filmmakers with another avenue or platform to create films that are amenable to OTT viewing. But the danger I see here is, with OTT, what is happening is that, as I said earlier, like the proportion of the global content in your viewing bouquet, viewing time, visual consumption has increased multifold, which I think is a problem, in the sense, because once subliminally, unconsciously, you're getting used to certain ways of saying, to certain kinds of narratives, to certain kinds of narrative pace, certain kinds of aesthetics of imaging. And also, it is not just about visual experience and look and feel of it. It is also about the politics of viewing, what is offered, and the kind of biases that go into the making of this the whole serials and all that. So it actually subliminally you are getting tuned politically, socially, and also in terms of media, to certain kinds of tastes, certain kinds of notions about technical excellence, narrative pace, compositions, imaging, sophistication and all that. Then what happens is, then you look down upon your local productions. You're not satisfied by that, because they come from low economies of scale. They're from small industries, like, for instance, Malayalam film industry is small industry. So you look down upon it. It doesn't actually cater to the global consumer that you are. Your local products and your global consumption patterns, conflict. There's a disconnect, which in the long run is going to create problems, because it will kill local industries. It will also gradually calibrate your political choices, your social consciousness. That is what I fear most.
Okay. There's one interesting point that you have raised right now, that the films that are screened in cinemas, they create the stars. So that sense of being coming together to watch an actor in a heroic mode creates a star. Whereas in your personal space, when you're watching it, when you're binge watching a series in your phone, that feel is missing. So, does that mean that the actors are uh, reorienting themselves to more characters that the new audience can associate with? One thing. Second thing, when you're watching the film in a cinema hall, the experience is a very like it takes you along with the narration, along with the technical thing, everything. Whereas in when you're watching the film on a phone, you have to be very specific. You have to be a basic understanding about the craft to appreciate the visual or the editing or the camera positioning, everything. So, are the actors and the technicians redesigning themselves to the new audience? Is it or is it? Does it mean? I'll ask. Also ask. Does it mean the end of the conventional stardom and the emergence of a new breed of acting?
Because if you look at the series, the popular series in uh, OTT platforms, they depend because you have to keep the audience in on the hook. You just can't leave them because they will just leave. And also these narratives, whatever you're seeing in OTT platforms, big OTT, Netflix or Amazon and all that, they are also the narrative pace, uh, the look and feel, the way in which the pace at which these climaxes occur, how it is calibrated. All these are actually designed through algorithms. They already know where people live, where people switch off, and who is watching where, when, and all that. So according to the feedback, the big data analysis, they're actually calibrating the way in which people watch. And then in turn, they calibrate their narratives to suit, the pace or, keep your eyeballs, there, stuck. So that's happening there. So what happens is that so all the actors or the drama of the series has to keep pace with this. Because you look at most of the series it climaxes every 5 minutes, it has to climax. Otherwise, people will leave that. There is no slow cinema. There is no emphasis on landscapes because it's all about drama, human drama, conflict. It has to have these kinds of very, very dramatic moments every time to capture. So it's a totally different kind of ball game, I would say, OTT series, and it needs different kinds of skills. The way in which produced, everything is totally different. Unlike cinema, which is totally different in the way in which it is conceived, acted, produced, and seen is totally different. You can see, for instance, most of the time you can see the difference in OTT platforms where you see when you watch films made for OTT and films that have come from theaters. Their look and feel is different. Actually, their pace is different. The way the emphasis on the atmospheres, landscapes, and all that is totally different because film works with huge frames and landscapes and all those kinds of things. So it doesn't actually work in OTT platforms and doesn't do justice or can't fit in with the kind of pace it needs, the climaxes it demands.
Yeah, like in the beginning, you said when you started as a reviewer in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, you were addressing a reader community who was yet to watch the film. So you have to give an idea about what the film is, give an idea about the storyline, and what are the highlights as actors or the technical excellence. So you probably introduce the film in a broader manner. Whereas now, as you have said, the audience is much more educated, informed about the art. They demand a different set of aesthetics from the visual that is appearing for them. So today, as a film reviewer, what are the challenges that you have it before you when you sit down? You said that start writing when the film triggers something in you. That's fine, but then uh, when you're when you have a reader in mind, what are the challenges that you face now today?
The basic challenge is like earlier, actually, you are the film viewing and reading a film review were on totally two different surfaces or two different media. Actually, you're reading in a magazine or newspaper, and you're watching a film in theater. Okay. Now what is happening is you're watching the film on your mobile phone, you're watching the review, reading the review in mobile phone. Okay. So if there is a kind of you're doing everything in the small screen. Then the kind of a way in which people's expectations about reactions and responses has become, people want instantaneous kind of responses, because there is something that has been tuned by television. Television has this kind of, debating, ping pong kind of thing. You say, you allege, then you counter allege, then damn it, sort of thing. So there is a kind of impatience that has been built into our media experience, where people want immediate response, immediate, you star rate, you just, either you hail it or you just, damn it kind of thing. So that's creating a problem. For instance, any kind of reading, any kind of art appreciation needs detachment, needs reflection, needs a certain sense of, reflection and meditation that you need for both watching the film, digesting it, the experience, as I said, like open yourself out to it, experience it, and then, react to it. Likewise, you also need similar kind of mindset to read a review. Writing a review is also a kind of creative kind of thing. He's not just telling the story. He or she is not trying to tell you what you have seen. It is about adding a different dimension to it, or telling you something that you haven't actually noticed, which actually prompts you to think about the film again. Okay, so both these need a certain kind of reflection, meditation, detachment, and some kind of unbiased way in which to look at life and look at things, which is becoming very, very rare today, because people are expecting immediate reactions, instantaneous kind of responses. People are putting reviews even while they're watching the film. So that becomes very, very difficult, because people, I think in the long run, maybe we are feeling this kind of feeling, maybe because we are still in a transition stage. After some time, maybe people will come to realize that it is totally different kind of thing. It's not, because what we find in these online reviews and in responses is actually opinions. They're not well argued out kind of evaluation of the film. They're just certain kinds of opinions, certain kinds of likes and dislikes, comments about stars, certain moments in the film, and all. That's not actually helping the film viewer, to look at that film differently, nor is it a reading experience. The film review should also be a reading experience. It's a kind of piece of literature. It's not just opinion making or just saying something. So I think it's not, the contemporary atmosphere is not amenable both to very reflective, detached kind of immersive film viewing, and also a detached and reading. So it's very difficult times we are living in. Maybe it is a kind of transition kind of thing, where people will come to realize that if I want to actually understand, if I want to not just to refurbish or reassert my own opinion about a film, that rather than I want my own opinions to be remade, to be I'm ready to be open, and I want to read something that makes me look at myself differently, which is also important, which is what real criticism would do. Like it opens up your mind to a different aspect of the film, which you have not actually noticed. So for that, the reader has to be open. He or she should not be looking for something that goes along with your opinion, because that is what is happening in most of the online reviews. It's a kind of you're creating a kind of a mirror world where you yourself get reflected. It's a kind of echo chambers that are created. What do you want to get?
These reviews are mostly instinctive, as you rightly said. They review on the go instead of just letting the film settle down. In retrospect, you think about the film and then you make a comment. That's not happening in online reviews. Like, they are instinctive, and at the same time they are trying to create a sort of mobilize some similar opinion.
Mhm.
Maybe the viral nature of the comment is more important than what is being said.
I know, yeah.
Yeah,
And also
maybe.
people tend to go, it's an echo chamber, no, where you want to, you are in the groups where everybody shares the same opinion. So you don't get to actually review yourself or, any kind of aspect of self-criticism is, never there.
Yeah. I hear Roy Matthew has raised a very important context. Roy, are you online? Can you raise the question?
Yes, sir. Shall I read it out?
Yeah, please.
So I wanted to know if the generational shift that Anand sir mentioned was also a class shift. The multiplex is more expensive than the single screen theater, ensuring only middle classes can afford to go to them. So does the disconnect between the spaces of the middle class and the lived reality of the masses cause them to see films as unrelated to socio-cultural phenomena? That's my question.
Definitely with special reference to Kerala, it has really shifted. For instance, if you look at the theater scene in Kerala, if you look at the 70s and 80s, we had around 1,700 screens all over Kerala in cities and towns and villages. Now you have only around 700 plus screens, which are also small, multiplex, not as big theaters that we had earlier. So there is a kind of huge shrinkage of, you know, screens, spaces, like the viewership has shrunk to a huge extent. It has also become more expensive. Definitely it has become more expensive. So it is actually, creating a situation where film itself, as a film industry itself, is finding it difficult to exist. If you look at, for instance, if you look at the analysis of data for Malayalam cinema, I've seen that for the last 10 years, we've taken an average. Malayalam cinema produces around 9% of the number of films produced in India. 9% of the films, number of films. But if you look at the revenue, it is less than 1%. So there is a kind of disconnect we have. Again, within the Malayalam film industry, the success rate is around 8%, which means 92% of the films do not get their money back. So it's a totally different kind of scenario where, you don't have enough audience to make an interesting film successful. And the whole theater going public has changed. And, especially in the last 10 years, there is a kind of slow shift towards family audience with the so-called new generation filmmakers coming up and scaling down, the narratives to the human scale. And, you have common kind of very, very ordinary kind of situations. That is actually, I think, that is the one turn that is positive turn that has happened in Malayalam cinema, is to bring it in the post-superstar era where everything has been brought down to a human scale, where a lot of ordinary things, ordinary milieu, ordinary settings are, depicted. And that is a way in which actually it also, I wouldn't say there is a disconnect with society. It is also actually talking about contemporary Kerala society, all these films. But do people go and watch those films? A different thing, because visual consumption has shifted, as I said, to homes and to personal viewing. So film box office or theater viewing itself doesn't actually bring the money back. So naturally, the industry has to recalibrate its strategies to not to address the box office. Only one or two films, like big films, can actually make it in the box office. All the others are actually angling towards either television or OTT or something like that. So there's a huge, you have to see this also as a kind of industrial crisis within the industry, like Malayalam, whose market is very small. Unlike, for instance, if you compare Hindi or Tamil or Telugu, which is a huge, theater network still existing, it also has a international market. For instance, Europe, US for Telugu cinema, like Malaysia, Singapore, all those Southeast Asian countries for Tamil cinema. Such a market doesn't exist for Kerala, but for the Gulf market, there's no diaspora market for Kerala. So all these are actually, impinge upon the selection of themes, the scale of production. All these are, fallouts of the whole changes that are happening that the industry is confronted with. Yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. So, yes, like coming back to your career as a literary critic or a film critic, your body of writing goes way beyond films. You have written about social issues, fine arts, heritage, theater, and related species. Like there is a range of articles that I can spot from your body of literature. Is such multidisciplinarity an essential requirement for the appreciation of art today? I'm asking this question very particularly because our education system is changing, and they are right now going through a major revision where the compartments are being broken down and different disciplines are being linked. So interdiscipline system of studying is being promoted, and we have students here, literature students here, trying to make a career out of the language study and the use of language. So your opinion on whether we need this multidisciplinarity to appreciate and do a review of films can be of help to them also. That's why I raised this particular question.
Yeah, 2 or 3 points. One is that today the education has shifted to the visual mode. Most of the people are actually, from the young age, people are actually learning things through visuals, not through listening or reading. It's through visuals that you're learning it. So understanding visual culture critically is very, very important. It has to be part of the curriculum from the beginning, I think, to understand visual culture, how visuals work, how do visuals make meaning, and how does it work in our, society and in as far as we are, every person, individuals are concerned. That is one thing. Second thing is, like, if you look at moving images, it is no longer a kind of restricted to cinema. Apart from most of the productions that are happening, even in interpersonal communication, we are actually using moving images. A lot of moving images are being used. Everybody is shooting, compiling, editing, and all that. Thirdly, if you look at art production, if you look at, for instance, if you are going for a Kochi Museum Biennial, 50% of the works are moving images. Okay, so cinema has entered galleries, cinema has entered art. All the artists are making films. So cinema has actually become a kind of expanded cinema, we call it. Like, it has entered all fields. It is part of our life in a huge way. It has penetrated into all aspects of our life. The way in which you understand life, experience, express it is through visual media. So it is very, very important that you understand visual media in all its manifestations and complexities. Third thing is, like, because visual media is everywhere, it is also important that you understand various disciplines to understand visual media, in a much more deeper sense. Both in terms of, as I said, one is this sense of history. For instance, I will take a recent example. For instance, if you can watch a film like Nanbagal Nerathu Mayakam as a contemporary film, okay. But if you are, conversant with Tamil cinema history and Tamil films, then your experience radically changes. Because, the kind of references that he brings in from Tamil cinema into that film gives an added dimension to it, added depth to the whole experience of watching the film. So understanding Tamil cinema becomes part of a kind of the way in which you enrich your experience, and it gives you a totally different experience of cinema. Any film, you take any film for that matter. To watch Oppenheimer, you have to know a lot of things about what happened during that time, what is Second World War context, what is happening in the relationship between science and state. All these things we have to know. Like, it adds to it enriches your experience in a big way. It is like listening to music, understanding the ragas. You can recognize the raga. Then you look at it totally different. Then you have the moment you connect with other things. Then it is a kind of there is a virality to it. It connects to a lot of other things. Then the whole network of experience becomes expanded, enriched. So you connect with a lot of things. So it's not a kind of visual. Looking at film is not a kind of solitary. It's not a monolithic kind of thing. It connects to a lot of other things. And any interesting film, has a lot of intertextual references. It has a lot of references to film history, as well as a lot of other things that are happening around it. So unless we are, we keep track of, we are sensitive to, open to all these things, your understanding of cinema, your experience of cinema will be very much limited. It's essential that you know about these things. And I think it's also a kind of, when you want to look at cinema, when you want to write about cinema, when you want to actually experience cinema more and more deeply, it also takes you to these disciplines. You're not just, it triggers you to read something else. because there is a reference there. I want to know what somebody said. So I go to read that. It's like a kind of cinema could be looked at as a hyperlink, where it links you to a lot of different things. If you travel those navigate those links, your experience of watching cinema, and it becomes different, becomes much more rich.
Yeah. I think Anjana has an interesting question in this context about how the films are to watch. Anjana, are you online? Can you ask the question? I think your question has got a lot of resonance with what CSS just now said.
Yes. So I wanted to ask you about the recent controversy regarding the online reviews, which are actually which have posed a threat to many of the recent movies, and that has created a lot of controversy. So what's your stand on that? Do you think that many of these online reviewers are actually equipped to undertake such a responsibility, their credentials? Do you think that they are qualified to do the kind of reviewing that they are at present doing? So what's your stand on it, sir?
For me, I wouldn't dare to question anybody's credentials. Film, one thing about film is every film viewer is a film critic. He may be a butcher or a banker or grocer, but he has an opinion about cinema, and he has the right to express it anywhere he wants. Like, unless it is offensive or abusive, he or she has the right to express it. So that is one basic thing about online reviews, because they are expressing their views, which nobody can prevent. You can't hold your opinion for 1 week and then express it. That is not the way in which a democracy functions. You express. And thing is, like, if you panic at such reactions, it only means that you don't have confidence in your own work. The film should be such that you can overcome these these kinds of flippant opinions and all that, because you have to have confidence in your film, in your own film. And thirdly, what I have most often found among the discussion that we had about these online discussions and all that, one thing is, like, if you have followed online reviews, they have a way in which they do the critiquing, the way in which they do it, which is very funny and not often you can't call it very conventional kind of film review, but they have a different way of narrating it in a very entertaining manner. So what happens is, this online review itself becomes a visual product, which is a consumer and a market of its own. And many people may be watching these reviews who are never a film viewer. They just watch it for the fun of listening to these reviewers, because they present it very interestingly. So let us not assume that all those people who follow these reviewers are potential film viewers. They are not. Okay, film viewers are film viewers, and these online readers are online readers. There may be some overlap, 10%, 20% overlap. Thirdly, I don't think that anybody is influenced by reviews in that sense. Like, if I want to see a movie, I want to see a movie. Second thing is, the question is, are movies giving the kind of experience that you will only get from theater? Because you already know today filmmakers are working in an atmosphere where you already know this film will come in OTT in 28 days. So I have this, because it has mentioned earlier, it's become very costly for a middle class family to go to a theater and watch a film. Has become 1,500 rupees. Expense is quite a big amount actually. So I will always think twice whether I should go or not. And so to a certain level, some maybe a very small proportion of films which could have made it in the theaters and which could be influenced by reviewers. Otherwise, I think largely it doesn't affect online reviews. And also this argument about film is a very costly medium. There is a lot of investment in it, and you should not trash it like this and all that. I don't believe in it, because reviewing is also a very you have invested a lot in it. And investment is not just about money. It's also about time. It's also about your knowledge and your all kinds of things. So let us not reduce it to finance. So I don't think online reviews can be rubbish like that. That will happen because that is part of this thing. Our new social media atmosphere, it thrives. And I think we also have to we have to be a little patient about it. Maybe through time, people will also compare the reading of the reviews with their viewing experience, where some reviewers may be depended upon. Sometimes you understand that he's just making it's nonsense. It doesn't actually help you to understand or a film. So you actually so gradually, I think it's a transition kind of issue. I think mostly I think it will get over.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you
Sure.
for looking into all the aspects. As you said, in a democracy, differences of opinion have to be entertained. That is definitely there. But when it crosses certain limits, naturally it creates certain unrest. It's just a reflection of that.
No, definitely, any kind of social intercourse in and also any kind of exchange in a public social media, public platform has to have certain kinds of limits. You can't abuse someone. You have to be logical about it, and
Yeah, sometimes it becomes very abusive. That's all.
Then that is a legal question, I think. Then it has to go to legal question. It's not a question of art criticism or film criticism. It's a kind of legal question where you have to file a case for defamation or something like that. There's nothing to do.
That's a different realm altogether.
Yeah.
So bringing back to what are the
And also one thing I will add, one more thing.
Yeah.
What is happening is when what I felt sad about is bringing the state into it. You're asking, you arrest YouTubers and for this is actually what is happening is you are actually bringing state into a kind of free interplay or interface between viewers and cinema. Should be free kind of domain where it's a realm of art where the filmmakers themselves, and if you look at the history of Indian cinema, you can see that state has always been an enemy of cinema because through censorship, a lot of kinds of controls have been brought in by state, and now the filmmakers themselves are inviting the state to intervene. Second step would be the state intervening upon the filmmakers to tell them what to make. Okay, so this is a kind of dangerous kind of thing that they are into.
So we are opening up a very dangerous possibility.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So now coming back to how audience should prepare for appreciating the film. We at Vallath have a film appreciation course where we sit together, watch films by masters and talk about it and discuss about it. Given the short time, it's not possible to watch the entire, catch up with all the landmark films and all the masters. But then, how much should a viewer have an experience of the classic films and the masters, works by the masters, so that they can connect with the trends and the films that they watch in the present times? So what is a lesson that they can imbibe from the masters?
I think the basic thing is you should, if you want to actually take cinema seriously, whether as a reviewer or even as a kind of a passion, then necessarily you have to know about the history of cinema, the major landmark films, the classics. You have to get to know them, and also about various movements in cinema. And if you look at film history, you have different movements which actually radically shifted the way in which film is looked at. The sensibilities were radically transformed. For instance, you have the 1925 Soviet montage movement, then you have the neorealist films, new wave films, national cinemas, African, Latin American cinema. So you have to get a feel of, understand those different traditions in world cinema and all that, which is very essential to understanding your own cinema in a much more nuanced manner, and also in the global context. You have to context, because you are making film. If you are making a Malayalam film today, you are not just making a film in Kerala, in Malayalam. It is also living in the world. You're also the whole technology, the whole sensibility is actually groomed by a lot of things that are happening around, and the technology which is global. Cinema has always been a global art. So you essentially have to plan your, maybe you can actually, many of the film programs do that, where you are exposed to, the landmark films, the classics, the masters, and also various trends in film history and also contemporary cinema. A lot of it is most of the time, if you look at the history of cinema and also history of art cinema in the world, you can see the emphasis shifting from now. Europe is no longer a place where people look up to for cinema. Actually, it has shifted to Southeast Asia. You have small countries like Taiwan, Thailand, Korea, Iran, all those making very interesting kind of films. Within India, you can see Northeast coming up as a huge, bringing a huge shift in visual sensibility, bringing a new kind of narrative. So all these things you have to be sensitive to, and you have to keep track of that. Otherwise, you won't be able to actually place a particular film in a context, in the broader context. You can understand, you can appreciate it, but not in the larger sense where you want to write about it, or you want to actually place it in a particular context in relation to both to your own film history and also in the global context. Yeah, I think.
Yeah. So when you talk about contextualizing the film in a contemporary socio-political scene, Bijoy, your question fits into that framework that we've been discussing here. Bijoy, are you online?
Yes, sir, I'm online.
Please ask the question.
So Animal was a recent movie and it has divided the internet. But one thing people don't see is that it is a movie, and also inside the movie, the protagonist is from a higher strata. He's the son of the most richest guy, and he's definitely above law, which is the reflection of the reality we live in. Money is above everything. It does get people the power they want to bypass over certain social constructs and even law. So in that scenario, it shows how certain freedom can be misused, and which is what normal people don't really understand, because for other people who are not really that free in terms of having such financial resources, how does this translate in our daily life, and how does viewing such movies and having opinions about it, having strong opinions about it, change our narrative, or how it affects us?
I didn't really get your question. Like strong opinions about what? Like
normal people having strong opinions about movies like Animal. How does it affect us?
Yeah, the problem is like Animal is one film that has actually crossed all the limits. Like it has set a new standard in depicting violence, which is actually problematic. I think which we should we should look at it very critically in the way in which you can most of the time in media there are two ways in which some sort of self-control happens, like just like in media where you have a certain kinds of industry standards, certain kinds of norms within the industry which permit certain kinds of things and which doesn't permit certain kinds of things. But if you go beyond that, then what happens is like people, if it becomes successful, then people start to copy that. People tend to make similar kinds of films, which again is going to magnify and this cycle of violence, which is very sad actually. So I think what we can do is like either in many countries you have there is a kind of restriction upon the age group which watches certain kinds of films. In India, most places it's not followed. So everybody watches all kinds of films. Even children watch very violent kinds of stuff, which can actually damage them in many ways. Internally, it can actually be a very, very damaging kind of thing. So we are not actually doing any kind of control over that. We are just opening it out to all kinds of views, which I think is dangerous. There should be both a kind of a move on the part of industry to actually put up certain kinds of internal controls. Secondly, there should also be a kind of a social outrage, social kind of criticism against these, and making people aware of the dangers that lie behind this. Because you just can't ban. I don't suggest a ban on films, because any kind of films is a kind of expression of art which has a freedom to show, provided he gets censor certificate and all that. That is already there. It is going through a filter. Beyond that, you just can't ask for a ban. But thing is like we have to create a kind of awareness about how to approach films. We have to look at, educate people about how to look at visuals critically. Discerning kind of viewers you have to create. That kind of culture has to be inculcated from the school system itself, where you look at images critically, so that these kinds of films are, are rejected by people. And that is the only thing that you can do. You just can't ban it, or difficult kind of situation that we are in, because if you look at contemporary cinema, the level of violence, the depiction of violence, visceral kind of gory scenes has actually increased hugely, especially in the post-COVID times. The COVID is a kind of a watershed, after which most of the themes, you will look at contemporary cinema, Malayalam cinema itself, you can see 90% of the films are about revenge. Most of the films are centered around violence. So this is a kind of trend that is happening, which we have to be very careful about. We have to discuss it. We have to actually think about the ways in which it's actually affecting us as personally, as individuals, as families, as society. I think we have to look at it very, very seriously and develop critical understanding towards that.
Yeah, when we discuss the limiting.
I have one more question. I have one more thing to say.
Yeah, sure, Vijay, go ahead.
So, do you think these movies are a result of a kind of toxic nostalgia? Because when we take, for instance, 100 years or 200 years before, it was times when the ones who were young weren't war torn. So there was always a sense of insecurity or how things will turn out. And COVID also reflected that. People have been made numb because of COVID, and having such extreme themes would maybe evoke certain feelings or even catharsis. Is that the reason why movies these days have such kind of strong themes?
Like, could be so. Like, I myself have written about it. Like, you are today, especially post-COVID, post-demonetization, post-CAA, we are living in a situation where everything has become, unpredictable. Suddenly, your currency can become invalid. Suddenly, your citizenship can be questioned. Suddenly, there is this huge COVID, there is flood, there is insecurity all around. Your jobs are not secure. The families, like as it existed, those family bonds are actually disintegrating. So there's like a huge level of insecurity and unpredictability in the air, both in terms of as an economy and also as a society and polity. So all this could be, reflecting upon the way in which art or cinema is reacting to the mood of the times. Could be one reason why people are going to extremes, because you are also, anesthetized by the daily consumption of violence through television and all kinds of social media and all that. You are getting numb. So you have to go beyond that to capture your attention. So that is what films may be doing. But the question is, how does a society address that? That is a question. Like many societies, either what is happening is this. Most of the time, what is happening is like you're asking for bans. You're asking for state to intervene and control it and ban it. That kind of thing can be a dangerous kind of thing, because states' preferences could be something else. It could be majoritarian in that sense. What is needed is a kind of, understanding from below. From people themselves have to reject, understand, and which needs a kind of very informed debates and critical understanding about the whole, the visual consumption practices that we are following.
Yeah, getting the state, as when we discuss about the online reviews, getting the state beyond the stage of gatekeeping, and let them give them that space to intervene in the freedom of expression could be dangerous. Because I'm asking this question because Nikki has brought up the issue of censoring as a gatekeeping mechanism to control this thing. Nikki, are you online?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, please go ahead and ask your question about that censoring part, because I think CS has already addressed the first part of your question. We can go about how a censor system for censoring and controlling this emergence can be effective. We can ask that question.
So you've already spoken a lot about the censor board, and you also mentioned that how they pose a threat to the movie makers and the entire team of these movies. So, but in the recent times, has censor board not been a failure at banning a lot of toxic projects that should have not come forth? Because you also mentioned that uh, banning is not the only solution, and when such toxic ideas are put forth by movies, it is how the society reacts, and the schools should teach them the right things. But schools are not the only institute out there that do the work of teaching and imbibing values. What we read is also what we see in the movies. A lot of movies are made based on books, and so it is very natural that movies and books both have been almost at equal par influencing students and the youth. So movies also play a very huge role in imbibing good values and influencing the masses in a both negative or positive way. So is the censor board, or should the censors board only be about putting a ban on certain words, nitpicking words that are abusive in nature, when the entire plot of a movie becomes very toxic, misogynistic, and abusive towards a certain gender or a certain class of people? Because censor board sometimes only works in the socio-political area, and usually like the movie Rajniti also posed a ban initially because it was attacking the reality of the politics of this country. So should the censor board only work towards this direction?
Yeah, you
As
asking
for
whether the
me, I would
beeps are not enough to beeps, occasional beeps in the dialogue are not enough to
Exactly
correct.
my point, sir, because the story and the idea is still
get it.
being brought forward. So, is how powerful an instrument is the censor board?
No, I think, as for me, I think all kinds of censorship is absurd. Actually, it is, especially in the digital era. There's no point in this whole thing. It's redundant, and it's also a colonial legacy. Where the colonial masters wanted to, their subjects to be surveilled and all that, controlled. There is a kind of it's a kind of colonial legacy which we are taking forward. And also, its legitimacy is drawn from the fact that India is a kind of multicultural, multi-religious, multi-caste, hierarchical society, and it's very important to be sensitive to the diversity of the country. That is maybe one legitimate reason why censorship is demanded. But I'm not a votary of censorship of any kind. But the problem I am seeing is like it is not just about state censorship. What you have seen, if you look at the last 20, 25 years of Indian cinema, you can see that most of the time, even after the censor board has given a sanction, given a certificate, people have asked for bans. You can see many films where, this hurt sentiment drama, some group comes up in the name of some community, they say, our sentiments are hurt, this film should be banned. And what happens is, instead of the state protecting the right of the filmmaker to show a film that has been censored to the public and to protect the right of the viewer to see the film, the state often sides with the hurt sentiment drama people. And, because they want to protect their voting, it may be a kind of vote banks and all that. So the drama plays out always in favor, not of the filmmaker or freedom of expression or freedom to view of the public, but of these, fringe groups that create these kinds of demands. So there's a kind of censorship that is happening, extra state censorship that is happening on the one side. And, secondly, maybe what is the kind of ways in which one could, resist this or change, bring about some sort of change? One could be like, for instance, I would like to, mention about this WCC in Malayalam cinema, like the formation of Women in Cinema Collective, which maybe as a kind of organization may not have had any kind of tangible result or any kind of formation of any law or procedures to restrict harassment or to bring about some parity of wages. No, it has not happened. But it has had another kind of influence. It has actually brought in a certain kind of restriction on the part of filmmakers to be sensitive about it. They brought out the issue, and people have become sensitive about it. They think this is not politically right to be abusive to women, to make certain kinds of statements, to portray certain kinds of characters. There is a kind that is one way to go about it, I think, because you create a kind of a social awareness, you voice your demands and voice your concerns in public forum. Then people get to see that, they sympathize with that. They actually see that point. Then naturally the filmmakers respond to it. Like they think that is not right to do that. So that may be one way in which you actually transform the ethical, uh, values of a industry. Otherwise, you always ask for bans and restrictions, which doesn't actually work. Either you have to educate, people. You have to get, as I said, like from school itself, you have to look at visual culture. How to analyze, how to look at how I think students should also know how visuals are produced. What is it? It's not truth. How it is manufactured, with the consent as how it is manufactured, and all this should be learned so that they are enabled, equipped to look at visual media critically. That is on the one side. And second, the initiative should also come from the part within the industry itself, just like WCC.
We are almost running out of time. Before we wind up, there's one thing that I wanted to ask, because during the conversation you raised about how the film, the perspective or the sensibility of the film has been shifting from, it's no longer Europe, it's Central Asia, even within India, it is the Northeast. So, but all these new trends are not available in the fingertips, in the OTT platforms or the things. This happens at the film festivals. This is where we get to see the changing, the emerging trends. But my question is, you have been artistic director for many film festivals in the plays, and you have also been in part of the jury for the national awards, national film awards. So in this digital revolution, what are the relevance beyond introducing these trends? What are the relevance of film festivals?
I think just like film societies, film festivals have to necessarily reinvent themselves if they want to remain relevant. Because what is happening is, like earlier, as I said, in the pre-digital era, the lack was the problem. There was no films available. So this was the only place. Film society was the only circuit, and film festivals was the only venue where you can watch these films from different parts of the world. Now it is always available online in different platforms, torrents, YouTube. There's no question of access, but even access I have a problem. Like what, as you said, like many interesting films which doesn't fall in line with the film festival circuit or the state, doesn't figure in this, the whole OTT or whatever platforms that you have. For that, actually, the filmmakers have to create an alternative viewing and sharing circuits. That is a different kind of thing, because that is not actually happening. But so what is happening is, whether it be film societies or film festivals, it is no longer a place of visual consumption alone, where you are given where you showcase all the contemporary films from all over the world. What you have to do is you have to create context. What is this festival for? Like if you look at International Film Festival of Kerala, it is a particular kind of mandate, because it's a film festival run by a state like Kerala, and it is certain kind of mandate where you are supposed to showcase third world cinema, where your choices are like that. So I think, so what happens is, like, people come to IFFK to watch what is happening in third world cinema today. And you also have certain kinds of festivals today essentially should have some kind of thematic focus, because you have a whole lot of films on different kinds of themes. You have a whole lot of international festivals focusing on particular themes. For instance, gender, queer cinema festivals, diasporic festivals, all kinds of things. So what we need from film festivals today is to actually create packages or program the content in such a way that it helps us to understand our own situation better, where we are able to connect with the world, and where we are connect with cinemas across the world who face similar predicament. Hence the third world, like there are, because it's not, everything is not equal. It's the kind of the films that you're watching are mostly European, which doesn't actually share our predicament or, and, certain kind of sensibility is thrust upon us. And if you look at the festivals, one major problem is that all these programmers, festival directors, curators are all from the West. And all this, even now, we have this kind of thinking that going to a particular Venice or Cannes is the thing, getting an Oscar is the ultimate, which is not. Because they are actually, they have their own choices. They have their own political preferences. They have their own aesthetic kind of, biases. And, certain kinds of cinema doesn't get shown there. So I think we have to actually redefine, turn the tables and, tell the world cinema, what we want. We want certain kind of cinema. We want to focus on certain kinds of themes. We want films that we show here, because all these films are available to all kinds of people. What we want to show here is films which resonate with our own sense of the world, or the way in which it can expand our horizons of understanding, which can better understand our own predicament. So we have to redesign, reinvent film festivals and film societies to address the question of access, as well as to create context where you understand the world better from your own perspectives, not from somebody else's perspective.
Thank you, C.S. Venkiteswaran. It has been a great experience talking to you about a variety of subjects related to film reviewing, because you did not narrow it down to the reviewing part alone. You brought in a lot of many issues into it. And I'm sure you might have inspired at least some of the participants here to take up film reviewing as a career option, maybe. So as we wind up, before if you have a word of advice for the listeners, let's hear that also, and then call it a day.
Keep your mind open and watch films, as many films as possible, and also read. Most of the I find lacking in many of the contemporary filmmakers and also film writers is lack of reading. Not just reading film reviews, which is also important, film theory, film history, and all that. It's also about literature. Your understanding about literature is very, very important. I think which is most often lacking. You can see in the writings, the kind of references that you bring in are, the kind of historical sense is often lacking, because they are so immersed in the contemporary that they don't have time to actually, look at the past. They don't even watch black and white films. They don't actually watch, because I've been to many appreciation courses and film students across Kerala, where they have not actually watched an Aravindan or Adur film, or any Chemmin, or they haven't watched Neelakuyil. So I think we have to essentially watch those films, because you have to know where you came from, and the kind of the paths you traverse, the kind of struggles that your forefathers or predecessors went through, how this form evolved, how these acting styles or narrative forms evolved. All this, it's a way of understanding yourself and your own history in the world. So I think what I would advise is watch films critically, make notes, and read. Read a lot of literature, and which is very important. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. And thank you all the participants for making this conversation very engaging and very productive. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Anand. Thank you all. Hope it is of some use to you. Thank you.